The boardroom fell silent. Ethan Ward, wearing a janitor's uniform and holding a mop, had just stopped $1 billion deal with 3 words. Victoria Hale, Manhattan's most feared investor, stared at him like he'd grown a second head. She'd dragged him in as a joke, entertainment for her partners during a tense negotiation. But the man standing before them wasn't laughing, and neither was anyone else, because what he'd just said made perfect, terrifying sense. If you want to see how a man in a janitor's uniform dismantled Wall Street's elite and rewrote the rules of power itself, stick with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The 73rd floor of the Hastings Tower smelled like money and fear. Victoria Hale could always tell the difference. Money had a clean scent, leather portfolios, expensive cologne, the faint metallic tang of ambition. Fear, though, that was something else. It clung to people, made them sweat through their tailored suits, made them talk too much or too little, made them mistakes. And Victoria Hale fed on mistakes. She stood at the head of the glass conference table, arms crossed, watching the room like a predator selecting prey. 8 men and 2 women sat around her, each representing firms with names that moved markets. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sprawled beneath them, a kingdom of steel and glass that bent to people like her. "Let me understand this correctly," Victoria said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You're asking me to commit $4.2 billion to a merger you haven't properly vetted." Marcus Trent, the lead partner from Silverton Capital, shifted in his seat. Sweat. Victoria caught it immediately. The man was wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, but he was sweating like a teenager caught cheating. "We've done extensive due diligence," Marcus said. Every metric points to—" "Every metric you chose to look at," Victoria interrupted. She uncrossed her arms and leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "Tell me about the operational integration timeline." Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The operational integration. The actual machinery of combining 2 manufacturing infrastructures across 17 states. The logistics, the regulatory approvals, the supply chain reconciliation." She paused. "You do have that mapped out, don't you?" The silence that followed was delicious. Victoria straightened. "You're selling me a fantasy wrapped in spreadsheets. You want my money to cover risks you haven't calculated because you're hoping momentum will carry you through the gaps." "Victoria," Marcus started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "I'm not interested in hope. I'm interested in data." She glanced at her watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than some people earned in a year. "You have 48 hours to bring me a complete operational breakdown, or this conversation is over." She turned to leave, but movement near the door caught her eye. A man in a gray janitor's uniform was emptying a trash can. He worked slowly, methodically, as if the tension in the room didn't exist, as if billion-dollar deals were just background noise to his Tuesday. Victoria stopped. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the stress of the day. Maybe it was the frustration of watching Marcus Trent fumble through a pitch that should have been airtight. Maybe it was just the absurdity of the contrast. These sharks in their $1,000 suits and this man with a garbage bag. "You," she said. The janitor looked up. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that seemed tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "Ma'am?" he said. Victoria felt the room shift. Her partners exchanged glances. Marcus looked confused. One of the women from Silverton, Rachel something, actually smiled, like this might be entertaining. "Come here," Victoria said. The janitor hesitated. "I'm working." "And now you're not. Come here." He set down his trash bag and walked to the table. He moved like someone used to being invisible, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. But there was something in his posture, a quiet steadiness that didn't quite match the uniform. Victoria gestured to the empty chair at the foot of the table. "Sit." "I'd rather stand." "Sit," he repeated. Not a request. He sat. The room was watching now, All eyes on Victoria and this janitor she'd pulled into a multi-billion-dollar negotiation like a prop in some bizarre power play. "What's your name?" Victoria asked. "Ethan Ward." "How long have you worked here, Ethan?" 3 years. "And in those 3 years, cleaning offices, emptying trash cans, what have you learned about this building?" Ethan looked at her carefully. "That people talk louder when they think no one's listening." Someone at the table laughed, a short, nervous sound quickly swallowed. Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Marcus here wants me to invest billions in a merger. Manufacturing companies, distribution networks, regulatory approvals. Very complicated." She waved a hand. "You've been cleaning these offices for 3 years. You've heard things. What do you think? Should I sign?" The absurdity of the question hung in the air. A few people around the table were grinning now. This was entertainment, a brief interlude before they got back to real work. But Ethan didn't smile. He looked at Victoria with those tired eyes and said 3 words that would change everything. "Don't sign it." The laughter started immediately. Marcus Trent practically choked. Rachel covered her mouth. Even Victoria felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Don't sign it," she repeated. "That's your professional opinion?" "Yes." "Based on what? Your extensive experience in mergers and acquisitions?" "Based on what I heard last Thursday." The laughter died. Victoria felt it, that shift in the room from entertainment to something else, something sharper. "What did you hear last Thursday?" she asked. Ethan looked uncomfortable now, like he was realizing he'd stepped into something he couldn't back out of. "I was cleaning the offices on 68, around 11 p.m. There was a conference call still going. The door was cracked. And they were talking about the Midwest distribution centers, specifically the EPA compliance issues." Marcus Trent went very still. "What EPA issues?" Victoria asked, her voice suddenly cold. "The ones in the operational review, Ethan said. Section 12, subsection D, 3 facilities operating under conditional permits pending environmental remediation. If those permits get revoked during the integration, which the timeline suggests is likely, the entire distribution network freezes. No way to move product. Revenue stops." The silence in the room was absolute. Victoria stared at Ethan Ward, this janitor in his gray uniform, who had just recited details that shouldn't exist in any trash can or overheard conversation. "Section 12, subsection D," she said slowly. "You remember that?" "I have a good memory." Marcus Trent found his voice. "This is ridiculous. We're not going to sit here and—" "Shut up," Victoria said, not looking at him. She kept her eyes on Ethan. "You're telling me there's a regulatory time bomb buried in the operational data. I'm telling you what I heard. From a conference call. Yes. At 11 p.m. on Thursday. Yes." Victoria turned to her assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, who stood near the wall with a tablet. "Pull the operational review, section 12. Claire's fingers flew across the screen. 30 seconds later, her face went pale. "It's there," Claire said quietly. 3 facilities. Conditional permits. Remediation deadline is 6 months after merger completion. Victoria looked back at Marcus. "Did you know about this?" "It's a minor issue," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Standard regulatory compliance. It's being handled." "Being handled," Victoria repeated. She stood up. "A regulatory freeze that could halt your primary revenue stream is being handled. And you didn't think to mention it. We have legal teams. Get out." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Take your fantasy numbers and your hidden risks and get the hell out of my building. We're done." The Silverton team stood in a chaos of gathered papers and wounded pride. Marcus looked like he wanted to say something, but Rachel grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. Within 2 minutes, the room had cleared of everyone except Victoria, Claire, and Ethan. Victoria walked to the windows and stared out at the city. Her city, the place where she'd built an empire by seeing what others missed, by asking the questions no one else thought to ask, and she'd just been outsmarted by a janitor. She turned around. Ethan was still sitting at the table, looking uncomfortable, like he was waiting for permission to leave. Where did you go to school? Victoria asked. MIT. Of course he did. What did you study? Applied mathematics and industrial engineering. And you're cleaning offices. I needed a job. Victoria studied him. There was a story there. She could feel it. You didn't go from MIT to pushing a mop cart without something breaking along the way. But that was a question for later. How much do they pay you? She asked. $18 an hour. Victoria walked back to the table. She pulled out a business card and wrote a number on the back. That's my direct line. Call me tomorrow at 9 a.m. Ethan looked at the card but didn't take it. Why? Because you just saved me $4 billion. I'd like to return the favor. I don't need saving. Everyone needs saving from something. She set the card on the table in front of him. 9 a.m. Don't be late. She walked out, leaving Ethan alone in the boardroom with a business card and the weight of what had just happened. 3 days later, Victoria sat in her office reading the news that confirmed everything. The EPA had launched an investigation into environmental violations at the exact facilities Ethan had mentioned. The merger was dead. Silverton Capital was scrambling. And Marcus Trent's career was circling the drain. Victoria should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt curious. She picked up her phone and called building security. This is Victoria Hale. I need employment records for a janitor named Ethan Ward. 10 minutes later, Claire walked in with a thin folder. That's it? Victoria asked. That's everything. He started 3 years ago. Perfect attendance. No disciplinary issues, no complaints. Claire hesitated. But there's something weird. What? His emergency contact. It's a law firm. Victoria took the folder and opened it. Sure enough, the emergency contact wasn't a family member or friend. It was Patterson and Gray, a corporate law firm in Midtown. Why would a janitor list a law firm as an emergency contact? Victoria asked. Claire shook her head. No idea. Victoria pulled out her phone and dialed the number. A receptionist answered on the second ring. Patterson and Gray, how may I direct your call? I need to speak with someone regarding Ethan Ward. A pause. May I ask who's calling? Victoria Hale, Hastings Capital. Another pause, longer this time. Please hold. The hold music was Vivaldi. Victoria waited. A man's voice came on the line. Ms. Hale, this is Robert Patterson. How can I help you? I'm calling about Ethan Ward. He's listed your firm as an emergency contact. Yes. Can you tell me why? I'm afraid that's confidential. Victoria felt her patience thinning. Mr. Patterson, I'm not asking for legal advice. I'm asking why a janitor working in my building has a corporate law firm on speed dial. Silence on the other end. Then, Ms. Hale, I'm going to give you some advice. Leave Ethan Ward alone. Excuse me? You heard me. Whatever interest you have in him, let it go. It's better for everyone. Better for who? Everyone. Robert Patterson hung up. Victoria stared at her phone. In her entire career, no one had ever hung up on her. No one. She looked at Claire. Find out everything you can about Ethan Ward. I don't care what it takes. The answer came 2 days later, buried in public records and sealed court documents that took considerable resources to access. Ethan Ward had been a rising star at Cambridge Analytics, a quantitative research firm that did predictive modeling for Fortune 500 companies. He'd built algorithms that forecasted market movements with uncanny accuracy. He'd been on track to make partner before he was 30, and then he'd blown the whistle. Cambridge had been cooking their models, selling clients certainty they couldn't deliver, manipulating data to hide risks. Ethan had discovered it, reported it internally, and when nothing changed, he'd gone to the SEC. The investigation had taken 2 years. Cambridge Analytics had been fined, restructured, and gutted. 3 executives had gone to prison. And Ethan Ward had been blacklisted. No firm would touch him. His name was toxic. He'd done the right thing, and it had cost him everything. So he disappeared into the background, taken a job where no one looked at him twice, where he could be invisible. Victoria read the file 3 times. Then she picked up her phone and called building management. This is Victoria Hale. I need to speak with Ethan Ward immediately. Tell him it's not optional. Ethan showed up at her office 20 minutes later, still in his uniform. Victoria gestured to the chair across from her desk. Sit. He sat. I know who you are, Victoria said. Ethan didn't react. Okay. Cambridge Analytics, the SEC investigation, the blacklist. Ancient history. Is it? Victoria leaned forward. You destroyed your career to tell the truth. That's not ancient history. That's character. It's stupidity, Ethan said flatly. I thought the system would protect me if I did the right thing. I was wrong. The system did protect you. Cambridge got shut down. People went to prison. And I'm cleaning toilets. Ethan stood up. Look, if you called me here to feel better about capitalism's ability to self-correct, you're wasting both our time. The bad guys lost. I lost too. Everyone loses. That's how it works. Sit down, Victoria said. I'd rather sit down. Ethan sat. Victoria opened a drawer and pulled out a contract. She slid it across the desk. What's this? Ethan asked. A job offer. Junior analyst, 60-hour weeks, ungodly stress. You'll work harder than you've ever worked in your life. She paused. Starting salary is $200,000. Ethan stared at the paper like it might explode. Why? He asked. Because you see things other people miss. Because you saved me $4 billion. Because I need someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth. Victoria leaned back. And because you deserve better than $18 an hour. Ethan picked up the contract. Read it slowly. Set it down. No, he said. Victoria blinked. No? I appreciate the offer, really, but no. You're turning down $200,000 to keep cleaning offices? I'm turning down the chance to get burned again. Ethan stood up. I've seen what happens to people who tell the truth in places like this. It doesn't end well. So thank you, but I'll pass. He walked to the door. Ethan, Victoria called. He stopped, but didn't turn around. The world needs people who tell the truth, she said. Even when it costs them, especially when it costs them. Ethan looked back over his shoulder. The world doesn't reward those people, Ms. Hale. It destroys them. He left. Victoria sat alone in her office, staring at the unsigned contract. She smiled. If Ethan Ward thought he could walk away from her that easily, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The next morning, Ethan's supervisor called him into the janitorial office. Ward, I don't know what you did, but you're being reassigned, the supervisor said, looking both confused and impressed. Reassigned where? Executive floors, 70 through 75. You'll be working directly under building management. The supervisor handed him a new ID badge. Whatever you did, it worked. That's a significant pay bump. Ethan looked at the badge. Then he looked up at the ceiling, as if he could see through 5 floors to Victoria Hale's office. She hadn't given him a choice. She'd changed the game instead. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan found himself cleaning offices he'd never had access to before. And Victoria Hale found excuses to be in those offices when he arrived. Tell me what you think of this, she'd say, showing him a contract. Or, walk me through your logic on that EPA issue. Or, you studied industrial engineering. How would you redesign this supply chain? Ethan tried to keep his distance. He'd answer her questions with the minimum necessary detail, then get back to work. But Victoria was persistent in a way that felt less like manipulation and more like genuine curiosity. One night, around 9 p.m., Ethan was cleaning the conference room when Victoria walked in with 2 cups of coffee. Peace offering, she said, handing him one. Ethan hesitated, then took it. Thanks. Victoria sat down at the table. Can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Fair point. She sipped her coffee. Why'd you do it? The whistleblowing. You had to know it would destroy your career. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Have you ever watched someone make a decision based on a lie? Every day. Then you know what it feels like. Watching people bet their futures on data you know is fake. Watching them lose everything because someone wanted to make their quarterly numbers look better. He set down his coffee. I couldn't watch it anymore. So you burned your life down to stop it. I guess I did. Victoria studied him. Do you regret it? Ethan thought about that. Ask me in another life. They sat in silence for a while. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered like a circuit board. Millions of lights, millions of decisions, millions of people trying to survive in a system that didn't care about them. I meant what I said, Victoria finally spoke. The world needs people like you. The world crushes people like me. Not if they're smart enough, not if they're strong enough. She stood up. Think about my offer, Ethan, not because you need the money, but because you could actually make a difference. She left him alone with his coffee and his thoughts. Archean. 3 nights later, everything changed. Ethan was working late, 72nd floor, cleaning the offices of Hastings Capital's senior partners. Most of the floor was empty, but light spilled from beneath one office door. He knocked. Janitorial services? No answer. He knocked again, then opened the door. The office belonged to Richard Caldwell, one of Victoria's senior partners, and Richard Caldwell was still there, hunched over his computer, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Sorry, Ethan said. I can come back. No, it's fine. Come in. Richard rubbed his eyes. I need a break anyway. Ethan started emptying the trash. Richard watched him with the unfocused stare of someone who'd been staring at spreadsheets too long. You're the guy Victoria keeps talking about, Richard said. Ethan looked up. She talks about me? Won't shut up about you, actually. The janitor who stopped the Silverton deal. Richard laughed, but it sounded tired. She thinks you're some kind of savant. I just pay attention. Apparently, Richard gestured at his computer screen. You any good with operational logistics? Depends on the operation. Healthcare supply chain, pandemic response protocols. We're trying to model distribution efficiency for emergency medical supplies across 18 states. Richard shook his head. It's a disaster. The numbers don't work. Ethan shouldn't have done what he did next. He should have finished cleaning and left, but he walked over to Richard's desk and looked at the screen. 5 minutes later, he'd identified the problem. A bottleneck in the interstate transport algorithm that was creating artificial scarcity in 3 regions. There, Ethan said, pointing. Your model assumes linear distribution, but you need hub-based clustering. Reorient around these 6 cities, and your efficiency jumps 40%. Richard stared at the screen, then at Ethan, then back at the screen. How did you... He trailed off. Ethan stepped back. I should go. Wait. Richard stood up. Do you have a minute? I want to show you something else. Why most That's how Ethan Ward, janitor, ended up spending 3 hours solving problems that Richard Caldwell's entire team had been struggling with for weeks. And that's how Victoria Hale, arriving early the next morning, found them asleep in Richard's office. Ethan in a chair, Richard at his desk, surrounded by printouts and coffee cups. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching. Then she smiled. Cut. The meeting happened 2 days later. Victoria called Ethan to her office. When he arrived, Richard Caldwell was already there, along with 2 other senior partners. Sit, Victoria said. Ethan sat. Richard tells me you solved his distribution crisis, Victoria said. I made a suggestion. A suggestion that saved us 3 weeks and potentially millions in missed opportunities. Victoria folded her hands on her desk. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop cleaning offices. You're going to accept my offer, revised upward to $250,000 with a signing bonus, and you're going to start Monday. Ms. Hale, I'm not done. You'll work directly under Richard. You'll have access to our full analytical resources, and you'll do what you do best, find the problems everyone else misses. She paused. This is not negotiable. Ethan looked at Richard, who shrugged. She's terrifying when she makes up her mind. I've noticed, Ethan said. He looked back at Victoria. If I do this, I need one guarantee. Name it. If I find something wrong, I mean really wrong, like Cambridge level wrong, I get to say so. No matter who it pisses off, no matter what it costs. The room went quiet. Victoria leaned forward. If you find something wrong, I expect you to burn the building down to expose it. That's why I want you here. Ethan searched her face for the lie, for the catch, for the thing that would make this all fall apart like it had before. He didn't find it. Okay, he said. I'll do it. Victoria smiled, a real smile, not the predator's grin she wore in negotiations. Welcome to Hastings Capital, Mr. Ward. They shook hands across the desk. Neither of them knew that in 6 months that handshake would be used against him in a federal courtroom. Neither of them knew that the real game hadn't even started yet. But for now, in that moment, Ethan Ward stopped being invisible, and that's when the danger truly began. Ethan's first day at Hastings Capital started with a desk that wasn't his and a computer that took 20 minutes to log into. The IT department had apparently been notified of his hire about 5 minutes before he walked through the door, and the resulting chaos meant he spent his first hour watching a teenager with a nose ring try to figure out why the system kept rejecting his credentials. "This is weird," the kid said, typing furiously. "It's like you don't exist in the database." "Story of my life," Ethan muttered. Richard Caldwell appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand, looking amused. "Problems?" "Just the usual corporate incompetence," Ethan said. "You'll fit right in." Richard handed him the coffee. "Come on, you can use my office until they sort this out." They walked through the 72nd floor, and Ethan felt the weight of every stare. People knew who he was, the janitor who'd somehow talked his way into a $250,000 job. The whispers followed him like a shadow. "Ignore them," Richard said quietly. "They're just jealous." "Of what? My extensive experience emptying trash cans?" "Of the fact that Victoria Hale fought for you. She doesn't fight for people, ever. So either you're actually brilliant or you've got something on her." Richard glanced at him. "I'm betting on brilliant, but I've been wrong before." They reached Richard's office, a corner suite with windows overlooking the Hudson. Richard gestured to the conference table where stacks of folders waited. "This is the Morrison account," Richard said. "Healthcare logistics company. They want us to optimize their distribution network for medical supplies. It's worth about $80 million in fees if we can pull it off." Ethan opened the first folder. Pages of data, shipment records, facility locations, transport costs, delivery times, the kind of information that would take most analysts weeks to parse. He saw the problem in 10 minutes. "Their warehouse placement is wrong," Ethan said. Richard looked up from his computer. "What?" "Look at these delivery zones." Ethan spread out a map. "They've got warehouses positioned for population density, but medical supplies don't follow population patterns. They follow emergency patterns. Traffic accidents, natural disasters, disease outbreaks. You need facilities positioned for rapid response, not gradual distribution." Richard walked over and studied the map. "Show me." Ethan grabbed a pen and started marking locations. "Here, here, and here. These 3 facilities are redundant for normal operations but critical for crisis response. They're about to close them to cut costs. If they do, their emergency response time increases by 40%. How do you know they're planning to close them?" Page 67. Budget projections for next fiscal year. Line item reduction in facility maintenance costs. Richard flipped to page 67, stared at it, looked at Ethan like he was some kind of alien. "You read this entire thing in 10 minutes? I read fast. Apparently." Richard pulled out his phone. "I need to call Morrison before they make a massive mistake." The call took 30 minutes. Richard explained the issue, Ethan's analysis, the potential consequences. By the end, Morrison's CEO was asking to meet with the analyst who caught this. Richard hung up and grinned. "They want you in the meeting next week, Gim." "I don't do meetings." "You do now. Welcome to consulting." Richard clapped him on the shoulder. "This is going to be fun." It wasn't fun. The Morrison meeting was a disaster, not because of the analysis, which was solid, but because Ethan had forgotten how to talk to people who weren't janitors or late-night security guards. He presented his findings like he was reading a phone book, and when Morrison's CFO asked a question, Ethan's answer was so technical that half the room looked confused. Victoria, who'd sat through the entire presentation in silence, waited until Morrison's team left before turning to Ethan. "That was terrible," she said. "The analysis was correct." The analysis was brilliant. Your delivery was like watching a robot have a stroke. She stood up. Richard, get him media training. Tomorrow. Media training? Ethan said. I'm not going on television. You're going to learn how to talk to human beings without making them feel stupid. That's non-negotiable. Victoria gathered her things. You've got the brain, Ethan. Now we need to teach you how to use it in a way that doesn't clear rooms. She left. Richard tried not to laugh. Failed. She's not wrong, Richard said. You sounded like you were explaining quantum physics to a kindergarten class. I was explaining distribution logistics to people who should understand distribution logistics. They're executives, not analysts. They need the story, not the spreadsheet. Richard pulled up a chair. Look, you're good at seeing problems, but if you can't make people care about those problems, your insights die in a folder somewhere. That's not what Victoria hired you for. Ethan knew he was right, didn't make it easier to swallow. The media training was worse than he'd imagined. A woman named Sandra, who spoke like she was permanently addressing a TED Talk crowd, tried to teach him about narrative frameworks and emotional resonance. After 2 hours, Ethan wanted to throw himself out a window. You're overthinking this, Sandra said. Just tell me about the Morrison account like you're talking to a friend. I don't have friends. Sandra blinked. Okay. Tell me like you're talking to someone you respect. Ethan took a breath. Started explaining the warehouse issue in simple terms. Why it mattered, what would happen if Morrison ignored it, how many people could die because supplies wouldn't arrive in time during a crisis. Sandra nodded. There, that's what you lead with. Not the data, the consequence. But the data proves the consequence. The consequence makes people care about the data. You're doing it backwards. She smiled. You're smart, Ethan. Brilliant, even. But brilliance without communication is just noise. He hated that she was right. Over the next month, Ethan rebuilt himself. He learned to translate his analysis into language that didn't require an engineering degree. He learned to read rooms, to gauge when people were following him and when their eyes glazed over. He learned to tell stories instead of reciting facts, and the results were undeniable. The Morrison account closed with Hastings Capital getting full implementation oversight, a $120 million contract. Ethan's projections for their crisis response network became the industry standard. Within 6 weeks, 3 other healthcare companies reached out asking for similar analysis. Victoria watched it all with the satisfied expression of someone who'd bet on the right horse. But not everyone was happy. Daniel Mercer, senior partner and Victoria's longest-serving executive, sat in her office one afternoon with a face like carved stone. We need to talk about your janitor, Daniel said. Victoria didn't look up from her computer. His name is Ethan. I don't care what his name is. He's making people uncomfortable. He's making you uncomfortable. There's a difference. Daniel leaned forward. He's been here 2 months, and he's already acting like he runs the place. He contradicted me in the Pemberton meeting last week. Because you were wrong. That's not the point. That's exactly the point. Victoria finally looked at him. You wanted to recommend a growth strategy that would have exposed Pemberton to unnecessary risk. Ethan caught it. That's his job. His job is to analyze data, not question senior partners in front of clients. Victoria closed her laptop. Daniel, I'm going to say this once. Ethan stays. If that makes you uncomfortable, work somewhere else. Daniel's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Then it's my mistake to make. Daniel left, and Victoria knew she'd just made an enemy. She'd worked with Daniel for 15 years, trusted him with her most sensitive accounts, built a partnership based on mutual respect. But she trusted Ethan's judgment more. That should have been a warning sign. 3 weeks later, Ethan walked into Victoria's office without knocking. She was on a call, but he didn't care. We need to talk, he said. Victoria held up a finger, finished her conversation, hung up. This better be good, she said. It's not. It's bad. Ethan dropped a folder on her desk. The Hartwell account. We're about to recommend a merger that's going to destroy them. Victoria opened the folder. Hartwell Industries was a manufacturing client. Steel production, automotive parts, industrial equipment. Hastings Capital had been advising them on a merger with a European competitor for 6 months. The deal was worth $300 million in fees. What's the problem? Victoria asked. The European company is insolvent. They're hiding it through offshore accounting, but their debt structure is unsustainable. The merger goes through, and in 18 months, Hartwell gets dragged down with them. Victoria read through Ethan's analysis. It was detailed, thorough, and absolutely damning. How did you find this, King? She asked. I was reviewing the European company's quarterly reports. The numbers didn't match their operational capacity. So I started digging into their supplier contracts, their credit agreements, their regulatory filings in 3 different countries. He pointed at the folder. They're propped up by short-term loans they can't repay. The merger is their exit strategy. They're selling Hartwell a company that's already dead. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. Who else knows about this? No one. I came straight to you. She picked up her phone, called Richard. Get in here. Now. Richard arrived 2 minutes later. Victoria handed him the folder. He read it, went pale. This can't be right, Richard said. Check it, Victoria said. Richard spent the next hour on his computer, pulling up international financial databases, calling contacts in Europe, cross-referencing Ethan's data. With each passing minute, his expression got worse. Finally, he looked up. He's right. The European company is a shell. The merger is a poison pill. Victoria sat back in her chair. Who's the lead on the Hartwell account? Richard hesitated. Daniel. Of course it was. Victoria called Daniel to her office. When he arrived, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. Did you know about this? She slid the folder across the desk. Daniel glanced at it. Know about what? The European company's insolvency. Daniel's expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. You've been working this deal for 6 months. You're telling me you didn't notice that our client is about to merge with a company drowning in hidden debt? The due diligence came back clean. The due diligence was incomplete, Ethan said from where he stood near the window. You didn't look at their offshore holdings or their credit structure. Daniel finally looked at Ethan, really looked at him, and the contempt was unmistakable. I didn't realize we were taking financial advice from custodial staff now, Daniel said. He's not custodial staff, but, Victoria said coldly. He's an analyst, and he just saved Hartwell from financial ruin. Did he? Or did he just torpedo a $300 million deal based on speculation? It's not speculation, Ethan said. It's data. It's paranoia dressed up as analysis. Daniel stood. Victoria, if we kill this deal based on his conspiracy theories, Hartwell will walk. And when they find out why, every client we have will question whether we're actually advising them or just protecting our own interests. Our interest is giving accurate advice, Victoria said. Our interest is keeping clients happy and deals closing. Daniel looked at Ethan. You've been here 3 months. You don't understand how this works. Sometimes you have to trust that the process missed a company hemorrhaging money through fraudulent accounting, Ethan interrupted. If we let this merger happen, Hartwell collapses in less than 2 years. That's not protecting anyone. Daniel turned to Victoria. It's him or me. The room went silent. Victoria looked at Daniel. 15 years of partnership, hundreds of successful deals, a relationship built on trust and mutual success. Then she looked at Ethan. 3 months. A janitor with an MIT degree and a history of burning his career to tell the truth. Get out, Daniel, Victoria said quietly. Daniel stared at her. What? You heard me? Pack your office. You're done. You're firing me over this? I'm firing you because you just tried to force me to choose between integrity and profit, and you assumed I'd choose profit. Victoria stood up. We don't push bad deals. We never have. If you've forgotten that, you don't belong here. Daniel's face went red. You're making a mistake. Then it's my mistake. Daniel looked at Ethan with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've just done. He left. The door closed. Victoria sat down slowly, like the weight of what had just happened was finally hitting her. You didn't have to do that, Ethan said. Yes, I did. Victoria rubbed her eyes. Call Hartwell. Set up a meeting. We need to kill this merger before it kills them. The meeting with Hartwell was brutal. Their CEO, a man named Thomas Hartwell, who'd built the company from nothing, listened to Ethan's presentation with a face like granite. When Ethan finished, Thomas was quiet for a long time. "You're telling me that Daniel Mercer, a man I've trusted for 6 years, was about to walk me into financial suicide," Thomas said. "I'm telling you the European company is insolvent," Ethan said. "Whether Daniel knew or not, I can't say, but the data doesn't lie." Thomas looked at Victoria. "Do you believe this?" "I've had my team verify every piece of it," Victoria said. "It's accurate." Thomas stood up and walked to the window, stared out at the city. "I almost made the biggest mistake of my life," he said quietly. "You didn't," Victoria said. "That's what matters." Thomas turned around. "I want him on my account." "Thomas, I want Ethan Ward personally overseeing every major decision this company makes. I don't care what it costs." Thomas looked at Ethan. "You just saved my company. I won't forget that." They shook hands. When they left the building, Victoria turned to Ethan. "Congratulations. You just became the most expensive analyst in the firm. I didn't do it for the money. I know. That's why Thomas trusts you." They walked in silence for a block. "Daniel meant what he said," Victoria finally spoke. "You have no idea what you've just done." "What do you mean?" Victoria stopped walking, looked at him seriously. "Daniel has friends, powerful friends. You just cost him his career. People like that don't forget. Are you saying I shouldn't have told you about Hartwell?" "I'm saying you should watch your back." Ethan thought about that, about the price of telling the truth, about how many times he'd paid it already. "I'm used to it," he said. But he wasn't, not really, because what happened next, he never saw coming. It started small. An article in a financial blog questioning Hastings Capital's recent personnel changes. Why had Daniel Mercer, a respected partner, suddenly departed? Anonymous sources suggested internal conflict, questions about firm direction, concerns about new hires with questionable backgrounds. Then it got bigger. A trade publication ran a piece about Ethan specifically, his history at Cambridge Analytics, the SEC investigation, his whistleblower status. The article painted him as a professional troublemaker, someone who destroyed companies from the inside, someone whose presence at Hastings Capital should concern clients. Victoria called an emergency meeting with her legal team. "Where's this coming from?" she demanded. Her lead attorney, a sharp woman named Jennifer Park, laid out a folder. "We've traced the articles back to a PR firm called Whitman Communications. They specialize in reputation management and strategic media placement. Who hired them?" "We don't know. The contract is buried under shell companies." Jennifer hesitated. "But Whitman has worked extensively with Daniel Mercer's clients in the past." Victoria's jaw tightened. "He's trying to destroy Ethan's reputation." "He's trying to destroy your firm's reputation," Jennifer corrected. "Ethan is just the opening." The attacks escalated. More articles, social media posts, rumors that Hastings Capital was taking on unvetted personnel, that their quality control was slipping, that Victoria Hale's judgment was compromised. 3 clients called asking for reassurance. One pulled a minor account entirely. Ethan sat in his office, watching it unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Richard found him there at 9 p.m., staring at his computer screen. "You okay?" Richard asked. "I've destroyed your firm," Ethan said. "You saved Hartwell Industries. That's not nothing. It won't matter if we lose everything else." Ethan closed his laptop. "Maybe I should leave." "Don't you dare!" Richard sat down. "You know what Victoria said when the first article came out? She said, 'Good, now we know who our real clients are.' She's not backing down. Neither should you. This is exactly what happened at Cambridge. I told the truth and everything collapsed. Cambridge collapsed because it was built on lies. This is different." Richard leaned forward. "Ethan, you're not the problem. You're the solution. And people who profit from problems hate that." Ethan wanted to believe him, but belief was getting harder to maintain. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Ethan was working late analyzing data for a new client when his computer froze. He tried restarting it. Nothing. Called IT. The same kid with the nose ring showed up, took one look at the screen, and went pale. "What?" Ethan asked. "I need to call security," the kid said. Why? Because your account just accessed the firm's restricted financial database and downloaded encrypted client files. Ethan's blood went cold. I didn't do that. The logs say you did, 20 minutes ago. About 300 files, including privileged account information. Security arrived. Then Victoria. Then the FBI. Ethan sat in a conference room while federal agents informed him that he was under investigation for corporate espionage and securities fraud. Someone had used his credentials to access confidential client data and transfer it to an offshore server. The digital trail led directly back to his computer. I didn't do this, Ethan said for the 10th time. Then who did? The lead agent, a tired-looking woman named Agent Morrison, asked. I don't know. Mr. Ward, your history shows a pattern of corporate whistleblowing followed by employment termination. Is it possible you were gathering evidence for another complaint? No, because from where I'm sitting, this looks like someone with a grudge against corporate America decided to steal confidential information. Victoria, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Agent Morrison, Ethan Ward has been with this firm for 4 months. In that time, he saved 2 clients from financial disasters and generated over $200 million in new business. The idea that he'd risk all that to steal files makes no sense. Unless he was planning to sell those files to competitors, Agent Morrison said, which the evidence suggests. What evidence? Ethan demanded. Agent Morrison slid a printed email across the table. It was from Ethan's account to an encrypted address. The subject line read, per our agreement. The body contained a list of client names and account numbers. Ethan stared at it. I didn't write this. It came from your email. Then someone hacked my email. We'll investigate that possibility. In the meantime, you're suspended pending the outcome of this investigation. Agent Morrison stood up. Don't leave the city. They left. Ethan sat alone with Victoria in the conference room. I didn't do this, he said quietly. I know. How do you know? Victoria looked at him. Because I've watched you for 4 months. You're a lot of things, Ethan. Stubborn, difficult, socially awkward, but you're not a thief. The FBI thinks otherwise. The FBI is looking at evidence. I'm looking at character. She stood up. Go home. Let me handle this. Ethan went home to his tiny apartment in Queens, sat on his couch in the dark, watched his phone light up with messages from unknown numbers, journalists, bloggers, people asking for comments on the Hastings Capital data breach. His life was imploding again, and this time he wasn't sure he could survive it. The next morning, Victoria called an emergency board meeting. Every senior partner at Hastings Capital gathered in the main conference room, minus Daniel Mercer. Victoria stood at the head of the table. Ethan Ward has been accused of corporate espionage, she said. The evidence appears damning, but I don't believe he did it. Your belief isn't evidence, one of the partners said. No, but this is. Victoria pulled up a presentation on the screen. I had our IT department do a deep forensic analysis of Ethan's computer. The files were accessed remotely using administrative credentials that Ethan doesn't have. Someone with high-level access framed him. The room went quiet. Who has those credentials, Oso? Someone asked. Senior partners in IT administration. Victoria paused, and until 3 weeks ago, Daniel Mercer. Understanding dawned on faces around the table. You think Daniel did this? Richard said. I think Daniel has motive, means, and opportunity. He lost his career because of Ethan. He's been waging a media campaign against him for weeks. This is the natural escalation. That's a serious accusation, another partner said, and I intend to prove it. Victoria looked around the table. I'm hiring an independent forensic firm to trace the breach. If Daniel's involved, we'll find evidence. And when we do, I'm going to make sure he faces consequences. And if we're wrong, someone asked, then we're wrong. But until we know for certain, Ethan Ward remains on administrative leave with full pay and the presumption of innocence. Victoria's voice was steel. This firm was built on integrity. We don't abandon people because accusations are convenient. The vote was close, but it passed. Ethan kept his job, for now, but the damage was done. Clients were nervous, the press was circling, and somewhere out there, someone was very happy to watch it all burn. Ethan didn't hear about the board meeting until Victoria called him that afternoon. "You're still employed," she said. "For how long?" "As long as it takes to clear your name." Victoria paused. "I'm not giving up on you, Ethan." "Maybe you should." "Too late. I already put my reputation on the line defending you. If you go down, I go down with you." Ethan closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be ready, because we're about to go to war." She hung up. Ethan sat in his apartment thinking about wars and casualties and the cost of telling the truth in a world that preferred comfortable lies. He'd thought joining Hastings Capital would be different. He'd thought Victoria Hale was different. But systems didn't change. They just found new ways to protect themselves. And right now, the system wanted him gone. The forensic investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Ethan sitting in his apartment watching his savings drain while lawyers billed by the hour and the media kept asking why Hastings Capital was defending an accused corporate spy. 3 weeks of Victoria fielding calls from panicked clients and board members who wanted Ethan gone yesterday. 3 weeks of waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Tuesday morning. Ethan's phone rang at 6 a.m. Victoria's name on the screen. "Turn on the news," she said. No greeting, no preamble. Ethan grabbed the remote, found a financial news channel. His own face stared back at him from the screen. Below it, the headline, "Former whistleblower arrested in multi-million-dollar corporate espionage case." "I'm watching it," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "Don't go outside. Don't talk to anyone. I'm sending a car." "Victoria." "The FBI just issued a warrant. They found offshore accounts in your name with deposits matching the stolen data's estimated value." She paused. "Ethan, they're coming to arrest you." The line went dead. Ethan sat frozen on his couch, watching the news anchor dissect his life in 30-second segments. His face at Cambridge Analytics, his testimony at the SEC hearing, his hiring at Hastings Capital. The implied narrative was clear. Troubled whistleblower becomes corporate criminal. Someone knocked on his door. Ethan looked through the peephole. 2 men in suits with badges. Behind them, uniformed officers. He opened the door because running would only make it worse. "Ethan Ward?" the lead agent said. Not Agent Morrison this time. Someone new. Someone who looked at Ethan like he'd already decided guilt or innocence. "Yes." "You're under arrest for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The rest was procedure. Handcuffs. Miranda rights. The walk through his building's lobby while neighbors stared. The drive to Federal Holding in Lower Manhattan while news helicopters circled overhead. Ethan had imagined this moment before. Back at Cambridge, when he'd first gone to the SEC, he'd known arrest was possible. But he'd thought if it came, it would be because he'd done something right, something brave. Not because someone had spent months systematically destroying him. The holding cell was exactly what he'd expected. Concrete, fluorescent lights, the smell of industrial cleaner and human desperation. They processed him like cargo, fingerprints, photographs, personal effects sealed in a plastic bag. Then they put him in a room with his court-appointed attorney. The lawyer was young, overworked, and visibly skeptical. Her name was Rachel Kim, and she'd probably been assigned this case about 15 minutes before walking in. "Mr. Ward, I've reviewed the charges," Rachel said, opening a folder that couldn't possibly contain enough information. "The prosecution has bank records showing offshore accounts in your name, digital forensics showing access to confidential files from your computer, email correspondence discussing the sale of proprietary information." She looked up. "This is not a good situation." "I didn't do any of it," Ethan said. "Then we need to prove that. Do you have any evidence that someone else had access to your computer?" Hastings Capital's IT department was running a forensic analysis. They found evidence of remote access. Rachel made a note. "Do you have a copy of that analysis?" "No, Victoria Hale has it." "Victoria Hale, your employer." "Former employer, probably." "Mr. Ward, I need you to understand something. The federal government doesn't bring cases like this unless they're confident of a conviction. Right now they have documentation, digital evidence, and financial records. What we have is your word." Rachel closed her folder. I'll do my best, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility of a plea deal. I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do. Then prepare yourself for trial and possibly prison. The arraignment happened the next morning. Ethan stood before a federal judge in an orange jumpsuit, listening to a prosecutor describe him as a flight risk with international connections and the technical skills to disappear. The judge set bail at $2 million. Ethan had $17,000 in his bank account. He was going back to holding. But as the marshals led him out of the courtroom, he saw Victoria sitting in the gallery. She caught his eye, nodded once. 4 hours later, Ethan was released. Victoria had posted bail using her personal assets as collateral. They met in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse. Victoria looked like she hadn't slept in days, which, knowing her, she probably hadn't. "You didn't have to do that," Ethan said. "Stop saying that. I'm getting tired of hearing it." Victoria pushed a coffee toward him. "Drink. You look like hell." Ethan drank. The coffee was terrible, but it was hot and real, and for a moment he could pretend his life wasn't disintegrating. "The forensic analysis is solid," Victoria said quietly. "Someone with senior-level access credentials initiated the breach. The IP address traces back to a location in Connecticut, Daniel Mercer's home office. Can you prove it? We're working on it. The problem is Daniel's good at covering his tracks. He used proxy servers, encrypted communications, offshore accounts with shell company fronts." Victoria rubbed her eyes. "He spent months planning this." "Why?" "I cost him his job, but this is scorched earth. Because you didn't just cost him his job. You cost him his reputation, his clients, his future in this industry." Victoria looked at Ethan. "People like Daniel don't see themselves as wrong. They see themselves as wronged, and they want revenge." Ethan set down his coffee. "I'm going to prison. Not if I can help it. Victoria, they have bank records, offshore accounts in my name. How do we fight that?" "By proving those accounts were created by someone else. By showing the timeline doesn't match your access or knowledge. By demonstrating that you're being framed." She leaned forward. "Ethan, I didn't bail you out because I'm sentimental. I did it because you're innocent, and I'm not letting an innocent man go to prison to protect a guilty one. Even if it costs you everything?" Victoria smiled, tired but real. "Especially then." They spent the next week building a defense. Victoria hired the best forensic accountants money could buy. They traced the offshore accounts back through layers of shell companies and discovered something crucial. The accounts had been opened using documents that contained errors. Small errors. The kind of errors someone would make if they were forging identity documents. Ethan's social security number was off by 1 digit. His mother's maiden name, used as a security question, was misspelled. Details that would slip past automated verification but proved the accounts weren't actually his. Rachel Kim, who'd initially seemed ready to push for a plea deal, suddenly became a believer. "This is good," but Rachel said, reviewing the analysis. "This shows someone created these accounts to frame you. Combined with the IT forensics showing remote access, we can argue reasonable doubt." "Is reasonable doubt enough?" Ethan asked. "In a criminal trial?" "Yes. The prosecution has to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. If we show someone else had means and opportunity, that's reasonable doubt." Rachel paused. "But we still need to identify who did it." That's where things got complicated. The evidence pointed to Daniel Mercer, but pointing and proving were different things. Daniel had been careful. Every connection went through intermediaries, shell companies, encrypted communications that would take months to unravel. And Ethan didn't have months. His trial was set for 6 weeks out. Victoria called another meeting at Hastings Capital. This time, it wasn't just senior partners. She'd brought in external investigators, forensic accountants, and a former FBI cybercrime specialist named Marcus Chen, who looked at the evidence with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. "The problem is attribution," Marcus said, studying multiple screens showing network traffic patterns. "We can prove the breach originated from outside Ethan's direct control. We can prove the offshore accounts are fraudulent, but connecting it definitively to Daniel Mercer requires finding the financial trail between Daniel and the shell companies that created those accounts." "How do we find that trail, Victoria asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, We don't. We make him show us. Everyone looked at him. Daniel's been running a sophisticated campaign, Marcus continued. Media attacks, legal pressure, financial fraud. That takes resources, coordination. He's had to pay people, PR firms, hackers, money launderers. Those payments leave traces. We've been looking for those traces, Victoria said. They're buried too deep. Because we've been looking in the wrong place. Daniel's smart. He wouldn't use his own accounts, but he has to trust someone, a partner, a financial advisor, someone managing the money. Marcus pulled up a new screen. What if we look at his associates, people he works with, people who might know about his offshore activities? Victoria's eyes narrowed. His accountant. Exactly. Daniel Mercer's accountant was a man named Stephen Prav, who operated a boutique financial consulting firm in Midtown. Stephen handled accounts for several high-net-worth individuals and had a reputation for discretion that bordered on paranoia. Getting information from him would be nearly impossible, unless they gave him a reason to talk. Victoria made a call to an old contact at the SEC, mentioned that she had concerns about potential financial irregularities involving one of Daniel Mercer's business associates, suggested that an inquiry might be worthwhile. 3 days later, Stephen Pratt's office was raided as part of an investigation into offshore tax evasion. Stephen, faced with potential federal charges, decided cooperation was preferable to loyalty. The information he provided was damning. Daniel had funneled nearly $3 million through shell companies over the past 4 months. The money had gone to a PR firm in London, a cybersecurity consultant in Singapore, and a network of offshore accounts, including the ones opened in Ethan's name. Stephen had documentation, emails, transfer records, everything needed to connect Daniel directly to the frame job. Rachel Kim filed an emergency motion with the court, presenting the new evidence. The prosecutor, faced with proof that their star witness was actually the perpetrator, had no choice but to drop the charges against Ethan. The judge wasn't happy, neither was the FBI. But the evidence was clear. Ethan Ward was innocent. The news broke on a Friday afternoon. The same channels that had crucified Ethan now ran corrections. Charges dropped in Hastings' capital case. Former Hastings partner implicated in elaborate frame job. FBI investigating corporate espionage conspiracy. Daniel Mercer was arrested at his Connecticut home. The footage showed him in handcuffs, being led to a federal vehicle while cameras flashed. He looked smaller, somehow, diminished. Ethan watched it from Victoria's office. "How do you feel?" Victoria asked. Ethan thought about that. Empty. Not vindicated? "I spent 6 weeks thinking I was going to prison for something I didn't do. I lost my job, my reputation, whatever future I might have had." He looked at her. "Getting proven innocent doesn't give that back." Victoria was quiet. "No, it doesn't." They sat in silence for a while. "The board wants to reinstate you," Victoria finally said. "Full position, back pay for the suspension, bonus for the trauma." "I don't want it." Victoria didn't look surprised. "Why not?" "Because this place almost destroyed me. Again. I told the truth, did the right thing, and it led to handcuffs and arraignment and bail I couldn't afford." Ethan stood up. "I'm done letting institutions decide my worth. So what will you do?" "No idea." Ethan walked to the window, looked out at Manhattan, the city that had chewed him up twice now. "Maybe something where the rules are clearer, where telling the truth doesn't require lawyers and forensic accountants and media campaigns." "That place doesn't exist," Victoria said quietly. "I know." Victoria stood and walked over to him. "Ethan, I understand your anger. I understand your exhaustion. But walking away now means Daniel wins. Daniel's going to prison. Daniel's one person. The system that let him do this? That's still here. Still operating. Still rewarding people who hide truth and punishing people who expose it." She paused. "You can walk away, but you can also stay and change it. I can't change a system this broken." "Not alone. But you don't have to be alone." Victoria looked at him seriously. "I'm offering you a partnership. Not employment. Partnership. Equal stake in Hastings Capital. equal say in how we operate, equal power to burn down anything that doesn't meet our standards. Ethan stared at her. You're offering me a partnership in your firm. Our firm. If you say yes. Victoria crossed her arms. I built this place on one principle: find the truth and follow it, no matter where it leads. But I've compromised, made exceptions, let things slide because it was easier than fighting. You don't compromise, you don't make exceptions. You're the most exhausting person I've ever worked with, and you're exactly what this place needs. I'm a liability. You just posted $2 million in bail for me. Best investment I ever made. Victoria smiled. What do you say? Want to help me rebuild this place into something that actually lives up to its reputation? Ethan wanted to say no. Wanted to walk away from boardrooms and partnerships and all the complicated politics of corporate America. But he looked at Victoria, this woman who'd risked everything to defend him, who'd fought when she could have cut her losses, who believed the system could be better if someone actually tried to make it better. What are the terms? He asked. Victoria's smile widened. Equal partnership, 20% equity stake, full decision-making authority on client acceptance and operational standards. Your name on the letterhead. I want one more thing. Name it. Anyone who tries to frame someone gets prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No settlements, no quiet departures, full accountability. Ethan looked at her. If we're going to do this, we do it right. Victoria extended her hand. Deal. They shook on it, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt something other than fear or anger or exhaustion. He felt hope. Dangerous, fragile hope that maybe this time would be different. The press conference happened the next week. Victoria stood at a podium in Hastings Capital's main conference room with Ethan beside her. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Victoria raised a hand and the room quieted. 6 weeks ago, Ethan Ward was arrested based on fabricated evidence created by a former partner seeking revenge. The charges were false. The evidence was manufactured, and the real criminal has been identified and arrested. She paused. This investigation revealed serious vulnerabilities in how our industry operates, how easily truth can be distorted, how power can be weaponized against those who challenge it. The reporters were scribbling notes, recording every word. Today, I'm announcing significant changes to Hastings Capital. First, Ethan Ward is joining the firm as a full partner with equity stake and operational authority. Second, we are implementing new internal controls to prevent future abuse. Third, we are establishing an independent ethics board with power to investigate and recommend termination for anyone found engaging in fraudulent or retaliatory behavior. Someone raised a hand. Ms. Hale, some critics say you're only making these changes because of the publicity. How do you respond? Victoria didn't hesitate. They're right. I should have made these changes years ago. I didn't because it was easier to trust the system. That was a mistake. This won't happen again. Another reporter stood. Mr. Ward, do you feel vindicated? Ethan leaned toward the microphone. I feel relieved. Vindication implies I got something back. I didn't. I lost 6 weeks of my life, my sense of security, and whatever remained of my faith in institutional justice. He paused. But I'm choosing to stay because walking away means nothing changes. And I'm tired of watching systems protect people who abuse them. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. When it ended, Victoria and Ethan walked back to her office. Their office now, technically, though Ethan still thought of it as hers. Richard was waiting for them with champagne. To the new partnership, Richard said, pouring 3 glasses. May it be profitable, ethical, and significantly less dramatic than the last 6 months. They drank to that. Later, after Richard left and the office emptied, Victoria and Ethan sat in the quiet. You know this doesn't fix everything, Ethan said. I know. People still think I'm guilty. The news ran corrections, but corrections don't stick the way accusations do. Give it time. And if time doesn't work? Victoria looked at him. Then we prove them wrong by being so good at what we do that they can't ignore it. Ethan wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that competence and integrity would eventually win out. But he'd believed that before. Still, he had something now he hadn't had at Cambridge. He had an ally, someone with power who actually gave a damn about truth. That had to count for something. The first test of the new partnership came 2 weeks later when a major client, a pharmaceutical company called Nexus Therapeutics, reached out asking for help with an acquisition. They wanted to buy a biotech startup that had developed a promising cancer treatment. The deal was worth billions. Ethan spent 3 days analyzing the startup's research data, clinical trial results, and regulatory filings. Then he walked into Victoria's office and said 4 words that would define their partnership. "We need to decline." Victoria looked up from her computer. "Why?" "Their phase 2 trial data doesn't support their claims. They're reporting efficacy rates that don't match the underlying patient outcomes. Either they're cooking the numbers or they're misinterpreting their own research. That's a serious accusation. It's what the data shows." Ethan laid out his analysis. If Nexus acquires this company based on false efficacy claims, and it comes out later, they're looking at fraud charges, FDA sanctions, and shareholder lawsuits. We can't advise them to proceed. Victoria studied the analysis. "This deal is worth $200 million in fees." "I know. Nexus is one of our largest clients." "I know that too." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Nexus's CEO. "David, it's Victoria. We've completed our analysis of the biotech acquisition." She paused. "We're recommending you walk away. The trial data has significant irregularities that pose major legal and regulatory risk." "Yes, I understand it's not what you wanted to hear. No, I'm confident in our analysis. If you'd like a second opinion, that's your prerogative, but our position won't change." She hung up. "How'd he take it?" Ethan asked. "Badly. He's getting a second opinion from Morrison and Associates. And if they say the deal is fine, then they're either incompetent or lying." Victoria leaned back. "We did the right thing." 3 months later, the biotech startup's trial data was exposed as fraudulent. The company collapsed. 2 executives were indicted, and Nexus Therapeutics called Victoria to thank her for saving them from disaster. The story made the rounds in financial circles. Hastings Capital, the firm that walked away from $200 million in fees because the deal didn't pass ethical muster. Some people called it integrity. Others called it naive. But clients noticed. New companies started reaching out, not the ones looking for someone to rubber stamp questionable decisions, the ones who actually wanted advice they could trust, the ones who'd been burned before by consultants who cared more about fees than outcomes. Within 6 months, Hastings Capital had rebuilt its client base with companies that valued honesty over convenience. It wasn't easy. There were long nights and difficult conversations and deals they had to walk away from because the numbers didn't work or the ethics didn't pass scrutiny, but it was working. Ethan found himself in a position he'd never imagined, not just surviving in the corporate world, but actually changing it. Not through grand gestures or public crusades, but through consistent, unglamorous insistence on truth. One evening, working late in the office, Victoria found him staring at the New York skyline. "Penny for your thoughts," she said. "I'm thinking about systems," Ethan said. "How they resist change, how they protect themselves, how many people have to break themselves trying to fix them before anything actually shifts." Cheerful. "I'm also thinking that maybe it's possible. Not easy, not quick, but possible." He looked at her. "You were right. I couldn't change Cambridge from the inside, but maybe I can help change this." Victoria smiled. "That's the most optimistic thing I've ever heard you say." "Don't get used to it." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. Somewhere out there, Daniel Mercer sat in a federal prison awaiting trial. Somewhere, other executives were making the same calculations he'd made, protecting power, hiding truth, punishing honesty. But here, in this office, 2 people had decided to do things differently. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't victory, it was just work. But it was work that mattered, and for now, that was enough. The partnership worked for 8 months before the cracks started showing. Not in the business. Hastings Capital was thriving, landing clients who actually wanted honest advice instead of convenient validation. The cracks were in Ethan. Victoria noticed it first during a client meeting with a manufacturing company out of Detroit. The CEO, was explaining their expansion plans when Ethan interrupted with a question that had nothing to do with the presentation. "Who audits your safety compliance?" Ethan asked. The CEO blinked. "I'm sorry. Your factory safety protocols. Who audits them?" "We have internal safety officers and quarterly reviews from..." "Third party or internal?" The CEO's face tightened. "Internal. Why does this matter?" "Because your workers' compensation claims increased 40% last year, while your production output only grew 12%. That suggests either your safety protocols aren't being followed or they're inadequate." Ethan pulled up data on his tablet. 3 hospitalizations in the past 6 months, 2 OSHA citations, 1 pending lawsuit from a worker who lost 2 fingers in machinery that should have had better safeguards. The room went silent. Victoria stepped in smoothly. What Ethan is pointing out is that operational efficiency can't come at the cost of worker safety. It's not just an ethical concern, it's a liability that will impact your valuation and our ability to recommend expansion financing. The CEO looked at Ethan like he'd just been slapped. "We're here to discuss capital expansion, not safety protocols." "They're connected," Ethan said flatly. "You can't expand a system that's already failing its workers. Fix the safety issues first, then we'll talk about growth." After the meeting ended and the clients left, Victoria closed her office door and looked at Ethan. "What was that?" she asked. "That was me doing my job. Your job is to analyze their financials, not ambush them with safety violations in front of their entire executive team. Their workers are getting hurt because the company cuts corners. That's relevant." "It's relevant, yes, but there's a way to bring it up that doesn't torpedo the entire relationship." Victoria sat down. "Ethan, I know you care about this stuff. I do too, but you can't fix every broken system in one meeting. So we just ignore it? Take their money and pretend we don't notice people are getting maimed?" "We don't ignore it. We address it strategically. We build a recommendation that includes safety improvements as a precondition for expansion funding. We give them a path forward that fixes the problem." She paused. "What we don't do is lecture them like they're children who don't know better." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "You're right. I handled it badly." "Yes, you did." Victoria's voice softened. "What's going on? This isn't the first time you've gone aggressive in meetings lately." "I'm tired of watching people prioritize profit over everything else. Profit over safety. Profit over truth. Profit over basic human decency." Ethan rubbed his face. "I thought this partnership would be different, that we could actually hold companies accountable. But we're still just advisors. We can recommend, but we can't force change. No, we can't force anything, but we can influence. We can make the ethical path the profitable path. We can show them that cutting corners costs more in the long run." Victoria leaned forward. "But we can't do that if you alienate every client who doesn't meet your standards immediately." "My standards are basic. Don't lie, don't hurt people, don't cook the books." And 90% of companies fail at least one of those at some point. Does that mean we refuse to work with 90% of companies? Or do we work with the ones willing to improve? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. The Detroit manufacturing company pulled their account the next day. Victoria didn't say anything about it, but Ethan felt the weight of that silence. Richard found him that evening, still at his desk at 9 p.m. "You look terrible," Richard said. "Thanks. I heard about Detroit." "Yeah, Richard sat down. "You know Victoria's not mad at you, right? Frustrated maybe, concerned definitely, but not mad. She should be mad. I cost us a major account." "You cost us an account with a company that's facing multiple lawsuits and potential federal safety violations. That's not a loss. That's dodging a liability." Richard paused. "But you did it in the worst possible way." "I know." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to self-destruct, like you're testing how far you can push before Victoria gives up on you." Ethan looked at Richard. "That's not what I'm doing." "Then what are you doing?" "I'm trying to make sure we don't become another firm that talks about ethics but abandons them when it's inconvenient. We're not that firm. Victoria literally risked everything to defend you when you were framed. She walked away from hundreds of millions in fees to maintain integrity. You know that." "I do." Then stop treating her like she's the enemy. Ethan was quiet. It's not her I'm fighting. Then who? Every other firm. Every other executive who thinks safety violations are acceptable losses. Every system that rewards people for hiding problems instead of fixing them. Ethan closed his laptop. I'm tired, Richard. I'm tired of fighting the same battles over and over. Then stop fighting and start building. You're a partner now. You have power. Use it to create something better instead of burning down everything that's not perfect. Richard left. Ethan sat alone in his office, thinking about battles and building and the difference between the two. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Thomas Hartwell, the CEO, whose company Ethan had saved from the disastrous European merger, called requesting a meeting. Not for business advice, for something else. They met at a coffee shop in Midtown. Thomas looked older than Ethan remembered, more tired. I wanted to thank you, Thomas said, for what you did. Stopping that merger saved my company. Probably saved my life, honestly. You already thanked me, multiple times. I know, but I also wanted to tell you something. Thomas stirred his coffee absently. After you exposed that deal, I started looking at other things. Other decisions I'd made, or almost made. Other advisors who'd told me what I wanted to hear instead of what I needed to know. And I found a lot of problems. A lot of places where I'd cut corners or ignored warning signs because it was easier than facing hard truths. Thomas looked at Ethan. You didn't just save me from one bad deal. You changed how I think about running my company. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. I'm implementing new safety protocols across all our facilities, Thomas continued. Not because regulations require it, but because I finally understood that cutting corners costs more than doing things right. I'm bringing in external auditors for everything. I'm building transparency into our operations. And I'm doing it because you showed me that integrity isn't a luxury, it's a foundation. That's good, Ethan said quietly. It's expensive and difficult, and my board fought me on half of it. Thomas smiled. But it's working. Our employee retention is up. Our accident rate is down. Our reputation is improving. Turns out treating people decently is good for business. Imagine that. Thomas laughed. I'm telling you this because I heard you've been having a rough time lately, pushing too hard, burning bridges. He paused. Don't stop pushing. The world needs people like you. But remember that change is slow. You can't fix everything at once. Sometimes you save one company and trust that the ripples spread. After Thomas left, Ethan sat with his coffee and thought about ripples. He'd been trying to change an entire industry with the force of his anger, but maybe that wasn't how change worked. Maybe it was smaller, individual conversations, individual companies, individual decisions that accumulated over time. He called Victoria. I owe you an apology, Ethan said. For which part? The Detroit meeting, and the last 2 months of being an insufferable perfectionist who's impossible to work with. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I'm listening. I've been angry at systems, at people who abuse those systems, at myself for not being able to fix everything. Ethan watched traffic move past the coffee shop window. But I think I've been fighting the wrong battle. I can't change the entire industry. But maybe I can change how we operate and trust that other companies notice. Thomas Hartwell called you, didn't he? How'd you know? Because he called me too. Told me that working with you changed his entire approach to business. He wanted to recommend us to other CEOs who are tired of advisors who just tell them what they want to hear. Victoria paused. Ethan, you're right that you can't change everything, but you're changing more than you realize. I'm also alienating clients and making your life difficult. Yes, you are. Victoria's voice held a smile. But I knew that when I made you partner, you're not supposed to make things easy. You're supposed to make things right. I can handle difficult. I'll try to be less of an ass about it. That would be appreciated. They hung up. Ethan finished his coffee and headed back to the office. When he arrived, he found a package on his desk. Inside was a framed photo, the boardroom where he'd first challenged Victoria about the Silverton deal. Someone had written on the mat, "Don't sign it." Ethan smiled. The next few months found a rhythm. Ethan still pushed hard on ethical standards, but he learned to frame his concerns as opportunities rather than accusations. He worked with companies willing to improve rather than expecting immediate perfection. And when he encountered companies that refused to change, he walked away without burning bridges. Victoria noticed the shift. So did Richard. The clients noticed too. Hastings Capital developed a reputation as the firm that told uncomfortable truths but offered viable solutions. They weren't the biggest firm or the flashiest, but they were the firm companies called when they actually wanted to fix problems instead of hiding them. Then came the Grayson Industries case. Grayson was a defense contractor. Aerospace systems, military hardware, government contracts worth billions. They approached Hastings Capital about optimizing their supply chain to reduce costs and increase efficiency. Ethan spent 2 weeks analyzing their operations. What he found made his blood run cold. He walked into Victoria's office and closed the door. "We have a problem," Ethan said. Victoria looked up from her computer. "How bad?" "Remember Cambridge Analytics? How they were cooking models and selling clients false certainty?" "Yes." "This is worse." Ethan laid out his findings. Grayson is using substandard materials in aerospace components. They're falsifying quality control reports. They're billing the government for grade A titanium and using grade C. The cost savings are going straight to executive bonuses. Victoria went very still. "Those components go into military aircraft." "Yes." "So if they fail, people die. Pilots, crew, anyone on board." Ethan pulled up technical specifications. "I found 3 incidents in the past 18 months that match the failure patterns you'd expect from substandard materials. They were ruled mechanical failures, but the materials explain everything." "You're telling me Grayson is knowingly installing defective components in military aircraft? I'm telling you their executives are getting rich by cutting corners that could kill people." Victoria was quiet for a long time. "If we report this, we're accusing a major defense contractor of fraud that could result in criminal charges." "Yes. They'll bury us in lawsuits, claim we're making false allegations, destroy our reputation. Probably. And if we don't report it, then we're complicit. We know people are dying because of defective parts and we stayed quiet." Ethan looked at her. "I've been down this road before, Victoria. I know what happens when you blow the whistle on powerful companies. It destroyed my life at Cambridge. It could destroy Hastings Capital." "But you're going to do it anyway." "I have to. You know I have to." Victoria stood and walked to the window, stared out at the city in the fading afternoon light. "When I started this firm, I promised myself I would never compromise on truth," she said quietly. "That promise got tested with you. When Daniel framed you, I had a choice: protect the firm or protect you. I chose you because you were telling the truth." "This is different. This could end everything we've built." "No, it's exactly the same." Victoria turned around. "We report it. We bring in the FBI, the DOD, whoever needs to know. We document everything. And we accept the consequences. You could lose your firm, then I lose my firm. But I don't lose my integrity." She walked back to her desk. "Call our lawyers. Tell them we need to prepare for the storm." The report went to the Department of Defense Inspector General, the FBI, and the SEC simultaneously. Hastings Capital handed over every piece of evidence Ethan had compiled: material specifications, quality control documents, financial records showing the connection between cost-cutting and executive compensation. The response was immediate and brutal. Grayson Industries issued a statement denying all allegations and threatening legal action against Hastings Capital for defamation and tortious interference. Their legal team, a firm with more lawyers than Hastings had employees, filed a $100 million lawsuit within 48 hours. The media picked up the story. Defense contractor accused of fraud. Major consulting firm making allegations. The coverage was split. Some outlets praised Hastings Capital for corporate courage. Others questioned their motives and suggested they were trying to gain publicity. Clients started calling, some to express support, others to distance themselves from the controversy. 3 major accounts pulled out within a week. Victoria sat in her office reviewing the damage. Richard stood nearby, looking grim. "The board wants to meet," Richard said. "Of course they do. They're going to ask you to retract, settle with Grayson, make this go away." "I know." "What are you going to tell them?" Victoria looked at the settlement offer Grayson's lawyers had sent over. They'd drop the lawsuit if Hastings Capital issued a public apology and retraction. They'd even throw in a consulting contract worth $50 million. She picked up the paper and dropped it in the trash. "I'm going to tell them no," Victoria said. The board meeting was exactly as contentious as expected. 9 senior partners sitting around a table, all of them looking at Victoria like she'd lost her mind. "You're destroying this firm over allegations we can't prove," one partner said. "We can prove them. We have documentation. Documentation that Grayson claims is misinterpreted or fabricated. This becomes a he said, she said, and we lose." Another partner leaned forward. "Victoria, I respect what you're trying to do, but this is corporate suicide." "This is corporate responsibility," Victoria said. "We have evidence that Grayson is installing defective components in military aircraft. We have evidence people have died because of it. Walking away from that makes us complicit. Walking into it makes us bankrupt," someone else said. "Then we'll be bankrupt with our integrity intact." Integrity doesn't pay salaries. Victoria stood up. "I started this firm on a simple principle. Tell the truth and follow it wherever it leads. That principle made us successful. It attracted the right clients. It built our reputation. And now you want me to abandon it because things got hard? We want you to be practical." "I'm being practical. Grayson is committing fraud that's killing people. When that becomes public, and it will become public, do you want to be the firm that exposed it or the firm that helped cover it up?" The room was quiet. "I'm not retracting," Victoria said. "I'm not settling, and if you want to force me out, you can try. But I own 40% of this firm, and Ethan owns another 20. Good luck getting the votes." She walked out. Richard found her in her office an hour later. "The board voted," Richard said. "And? 7-2 in favor of supporting your position. Barely, but it passed." Victoria let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Who voted against?" "Patterson and Williams. They're threatening to leave." "Let them." "Victoria, see, I mean it. If they'd rather protect a company that's killing people than do the right thing, I don't want them here." Richard sat down. "You know this is going to get worse before it gets better." "I know." "Grayson has resources we can't match. They'll drag this out for years, bury us in legal fees, destroy our reputation in the industry. I know that too." "And you're okay with that?" Victoria thought about Ethan, about a man who'd lost everything to tell the truth at Cambridge, about a janitor who could have stayed invisible but chose to speak up, about a partner who pushed her to be better even when it cost him. "I'm okay with that," she said. The investigation took 6 months. The Department of Defense Inspector General tore through Grayson's operations with the thoroughness of a federal agency that didn't appreciate being defrauded. They found everything Ethan had found and more. Systematic quality control failures, falsified inspection reports, executive emails discussing the cost-benefits of using cheaper materials. 3 Grayson executives were arrested. The CEO resigned. The company's stock dropped 40% in a single day. And the military aircraft incidents Ethan had identified? Further investigation revealed they were exactly what he'd suspected: mechanical failures caused by substandard materials. Pilots had died because executives wanted bigger bonuses. The vindication should have felt triumphant. Instead, Ethan stood in Victoria's office looking at the news coverage and felt hollow. 6 people, he said quietly. 6 pilots died in crashes that could have been prevented. Victoria walked over and stood beside him. "You didn't kill them. Grayson did." "I didn't save them either. I found the evidence too late." "You can't save everyone, Ethan. Sometimes you can only stop the bleeding and make sure it doesn't happen again." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No. It's supposed to help you keep going." They stood in silence, watching the news cycle churn through another corporate scandal. "Thomas Hartwell was right," Ethan finally said. "Change is slow. You save one company at a time and hope the ripples spread." The ripples are spreading. Grayson's competitors are scrambling to audit their quality control. The DoD is implementing new oversight requirements. 3 other defense contractors have reached out asking us to review their operations. Victoria paused. "You started something here." "We started something. I would have burned out months ago without you." "That's what partners are for." Ethan's phone buzzed. A news alert. Grayson Industries had just agreed to a plea deal, criminal penalties, restitution to victims' families, complete operational restructuring under federal oversight. Justice. Slow and imperfect, but justice nonetheless. We won, Ethan said, though it didn't feel like victory. We did the right thing, Victoria corrected. Winning and right aren't always the same. Patterson and Williams left the firm, taking 2 smaller clients with them. Hastings Capital weathered the loss and moved forward. 3 months later, they landed the biggest account in the firm's history, a Fortune 100 company that specifically chose Hastings Capital because of their handling of the Grayson case. We want advisors who tell us the truth, the CEO said during the signing meeting, even when it's expensive, especially when it's expensive. Ethan sat in that meeting and realized something had shifted. Not in the world. The world was still full of people cutting corners and hiding problems, but in how people responded to those who refused to play along. There was a market for integrity. It was smaller than the market for convenient lies, but it existed. And it was growing. That night, Ethan and Victoria had dinner at a quiet restaurant in the village. Just the 2 of them. No clients, no partners, no board members demanding answers. I've been thinking, Victoria said over wine that cost more than Ethan used to make in a week. Dangerous. I want to expand, not just take on more clients, but actively recruit analysts like you. People who've been blacklisted for telling the truth. People who the system threw away. Ethan looked at her. You want to build a firm of whistleblowers. I want to build a firm of people who can't be bought, who see problems and fix them instead of hiding them. Victoria leaned forward. You changed this place, Ethan. Changed how I think about business. I want to scale that. Make it bigger than just us. That's ambitious. You're the one who told me systems need to change. Help me build a system that actually works. Ethan thought about it. About all the people like him who'd lost careers for doing the right thing. About how much talent was wasted because companies preferred comfortable liars to uncomfortable truth-tellers. Okay, he said, let's do it. They spent the rest of dinner planning. By the time they left, they had the outline of something new. Not just a consulting firm, but a model for how business could operate when integrity was the foundation instead of the afterthought. It wouldn't be easy, it would be expensive and difficult, and they'd lose more battles than they won. But for the first time since Cambridge, Ethan felt like he was building something instead of just fighting everything. And that made all the difference. The transformation of Hastings Capital didn't happen overnight. Victoria's vision of building a firm staffed by people the system had discarded was met with skepticism from some partners and outright hostility from others. But she pushed forward anyway, and Ethan helped her navigate the resistance. Their first recruit was a woman named Maya Okonkwo, who'd been blacklisted from the energy sector after exposing accounting fraud at a major oil company. She'd lost her job, her savings to legal fees, and 3 years of her life fighting a defamation lawsuit she eventually won, but that left her unemployable. Maya walked into the interview looking like someone who'd learned not to trust easy promises. Why should I believe this is different? Maya asked, sitting across from Victoria and Ethan in the conference room. I've heard the integrity speech before. It always falls apart when money gets involved. Because we put our money where our mouth is, Victoria said. She slid a folder across the table. This is the Grayson Industries case. We exposed a defense contractor committing fraud that killed people. It cost us clients, legal fees, and nearly destroyed the firm. We did it anyway. Maya read through the file. Her expression shifted from skeptical to surprised to something like hope. You actually went through with it, Maya said quietly. We did, and we'll do it again. Victoria leaned forward. I'm not going to lie to you, Maya. Working here is hard. We lose accounts because we won't compromise. We make less money than we could if we played the game, but we sleep at night knowing we're not covering up fraud or helping companies hurt people. What's the catch? The catch is you have to be okay with being uncomfortable, with telling powerful people things they don't want to hear, with walking away from lucrative deals because they're built on lies. Ethan spoke for the first time. The catch is you have to keep doing the right thing even when it keeps costing you. Maya looked at him, really looked at him. You're the janitor. Was the janitor, now I'm a partner. I read about you, Cambridge Analytics, the SEC investigation, getting framed for espionage. She paused. You lost everything twice and you're still here. Third time's the charm, Ethan said with a slight smile. Maya laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise her. Okay, I'm in. Over the next year, they brought in 5 more analysts with similar stories. All of them had been punished for telling the truth. All of them carried the weight of careers destroyed by integrity. And all of them found something at Hastings Capital they hadn't expected, a place where that integrity was valued instead of weaponized against them. The firm's reputation grew in unexpected ways. They weren't the biggest or the richest, but they became known as the firm that couldn't be bought. Companies that wanted real advice, not validation disguised as consulting, started seeking them out. But the real test came 14 months after Maya joined. A technology company called Vertex Systems approached them about going public. The IPO would be worth billions, and Hastings Capital's role as financial advisor would generate fees in the tens of millions. It was the kind of deal that could define a firm's decade. Ethan led the due diligence team. Maya worked alongside him, analyzing Vertex's financials, technology claims, and market projections. For 3 weeks, everything looked solid. Then Maya found something in the user data. She knocked on Ethan's office door at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. He was still there, naturally. "We have a problem," Maya said. Ethan looked up from his computer. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where our client is lying about their core product metrics." Maya pulled up data on her tablet. Vertex claims 40 million active users, but their server logs, API calls, and bandwidth usage don't support that number. I ran the calculations 3 different ways. They have maybe 15 million real users. The rest are bots, duplicate accounts, or completely fabricated. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. "Show me." They spent the next 4 hours going through the data. Maya was right. Vertex had inflated their user numbers by nearly 300%. The entire valuation, the billions in IPO pricing, was based on a lie. At 3 a.m., Ethan called Victoria. "This better be important," she answered, voice thick with sleep. "Vertex is committing fraud. We need to kill the IPO." Victoria was silent for a moment. Then, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. By 4 a.m., they were all in the conference room. Victoria, Ethan, Maya, Richard, and 2 other senior partners. The evidence was spread across the table like an indictment. "If we expose this, Vertex will deny everything," Richard said. "They'll say we're sabotaging them because we want a bigger cut of the fees or because we're trying to steal their technology." "Let them say it," Victoria said. "We have the data. We have analysis of their data. They'll argue our interpretation is wrong. They'll hire their own experts to contradict us. This becomes a battle of competing analyses." One of the other partners rubbed his face. "And meanwhile, we lose the biggest deal in firm history." "If we don't expose it, we're helping them defraud investors," Maya said quietly. "People will buy stock based on user numbers that don't exist. When the truth comes out, and it will, those investors lose billions. Some of them lose everything." "That's not our responsibility," the partner said. "We're advisors, not regulators." "We're advisors who know our client is lying," Ethan said. "That makes it our responsibility." The debate continued for another hour. The practical arguments against exposing Vertex were compelling: legal liability, loss of fees, damage to the firm's reputation for torpedoing such a high-profile deal. But the ethical arguments were clearer. Finally, Victoria stood up. "I'm going to tell you all a story," she said. "When I started this firm 20 years ago, I had one client and a dream that I could build something different, something honest. For 15 years, I succeeded. We grew. We thrived. We made money and maintained our integrity." She paused, looking around the table. "Then I met a man who was willing to destroy his career to tell the truth, who got blacklisted, framed for crimes he didn't commit, and nearly went to prison because he wouldn't compromise. That man is now my partner, and he's taught me that integrity isn't something you maintain when it's convenient. It's what you hold on to when everything else is falling apart." Victoria looked at the senior partners. "We're killing the Vertex IPO. We're reporting the fraud to the SEC. And if you have a problem with that, there's the door." Nobody moved. "Good," Victoria said. "Ethan, draft the report. Maya, compile all supporting evidence. We present this to Vertex's board tomorrow morning." The meeting with Vertex was brutal. Their CEO, a charismatic entrepreneur named Kyle Morrison, who'd been featured on magazine covers as the next tech visionary, listened to their presentation with a face like stone. When Ethan finished laying out the evidence, Kyle leaned back in his chair. "You're making a mistake," Kyle said calmly. "Our user numbers are accurate. Your analysis is flawed." "Our analysis is based on your own server logs," Maya said. "We're not interpreting data. We're showing you what your systems actually record. Server logs can be incomplete. They don't capture all user activity. They capture enough to show a massive discrepancy between your claimed users and your actual activity," Ethan said. "You're off by a factor of 3. Kyle's expression hardened. "You know what I think? I think you're trying to tank our IPO so you can renegotiate your fees. This is extortion dressed up as ethics. This is us telling you that we won't help you commit securities fraud," Victoria said evenly. "You can fix your numbers and proceed with an honest IPO, or you can find new advisors. Those are your options. My option is to sue you for breach of contract, defamation, and tortious interference." Kyle stood up. "You just made a very expensive enemy." "Get in line," Victoria said. Vertex pulled their business and hired Morrison and Associates, the same firm that had given Nexus Therapeutics the second opinion on the fraudulent biotech acquisition. Morrison was happy to take Vertex's money and validate their numbers. The IPO went forward 3 months later. It was spectacular. Stock price doubled on the first day. Kyle Morrison became a billionaire on paper. Early investors made fortunes. For 6 months, it looked like Hastings Capital had made a catastrophic mistake. Then a short seller published a report questioning Vertex's user numbers. Tech journalists started investigating. Former Vertex employees came forward as whistleblowers, and the whole house of cards collapsed. Vertex's stock dropped 85% in 2 weeks. The SEC launched an investigation. Kyle Morrison resigned in disgrace. Investors filed class action lawsuits. Morrison and Associates faced sanctions for failing to conduct adequate due diligence, and Hastings Capital received a call from the SEC thanking them for the early warning they'd filed months before. Ethan watched the news coverage from his office. Maya stood beside him. "We called it," Maya said. "We were right." "We were right, and people still lost billions," Ethan said, "because Morrison and Associates was willing to sign off on lies and investors trusted them. We can't control what other firms do. We can only control what we do. Is that enough?" Maya looked at him. "It has to be, because the alternative is becoming them." That evening, Victoria found Ethan still at his desk. "You know what today is?" she asked. "Tuesday. It's exactly 2 years since you told me not to sign the Silverton deal." Victoria sat down. 2 years since a janitor stopped a billion-dollar merger and changed the trajectory of this firm. And here we are, still fighting the same battles. No, we're fighting bigger battles, better battles. Victoria leaned forward. "Ethan, when you walked into that boardroom 2 years ago, you were invisible. The system had made you invisible because you refused to play along. Now you're a partner in one of the most respected advisory firms in the country. You've exposed fraud that sent executives to prison. You've saved companies from disasters. You've built something that matters." "We've built something," Ethan corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "That's my point. You don't have to fight alone anymore. None of us do." Victoria gestured toward the office beyond. "Maya, Richard, the others, they're all here because we created a place where telling the truth doesn't mean career suicide. That's not nothing." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever regret it? The clients we've lost? The money we've walked away from? The easier path we could have taken?" "Every day," Victoria said honestly. "And then I think about the alternative. I think about being the firm that helped Grayson Industries cover up defective parts that killed pilots. I think about enabling Vertex to defraud investors. I think about becoming everything I started this firm to oppose." She paused. "So, no, I don't regret it. Not really. Even though it's hard? Especially because it's hard. Easy decisions don't require integrity. Hard ones do." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights come on as evening settled over Manhattan. "I have something to tell you," Victoria said. "The board voted this morning. They want to make our recruiting program official, turn it into a formal initiative as they actively seek out people who've been blacklisted for whistleblowing, offer them positions, help them rebuild their careers." "That's going to be expensive." "Very. But one of our clients offered to fund it, Thomas Hartwell. He's creating a foundation specifically to support ethical business practices, and he wants us to run the talent development program." Ethan looked at her in surprise. "Hartwell's funding this? He said you changed how he thinks about running a company. Now he wants to help create more people like you." Victoria smiled. "Apparently the ripples are spreading faster than we thought." The program launched 6 months later. They called it the Truth Initiative, and it did exactly what Victoria had envisioned: identified talented professionals who'd been blacklisted for ethical stands and gave them a second chance. Within a year, they'd placed 15 people in positions at Hastings Capital and partner firms. The impact rippled outward. Other companies noticed. Some of them started questioning why they'd blacklisted honest employees in the first place. Some of them changed their policies. A few even reached out to people they'd fired and offered to make amends. It wasn't a revolution. The industry didn't transform overnight. But small things shifted, conversations changed, standards evolved. And slowly, the idea that integrity was a liability began to lose its grip. Ethan found himself in an unexpected position, not just surviving in the corporate world, but actually influencing it. He spoke at industry conferences about ethical due diligence. He consulted with firms trying to rebuild after scandals. He mentored young analysts who were struggling with the pressure to compromise. And sometimes, late at night when the office was empty, he'd stand in the boardroom where it all started and think about the journey. From janitor to partner, from invisible to influential, from fighting alone to building something bigger than himself. It hadn't been smooth. It had cost him sleep and relationships and years of his life spent battling systems that resisted change. But standing there, looking at what they'd built, he could finally say it had been worth it. One afternoon, almost 3 years after the Vertex case, Ethan received an unexpected visitor. Daniel Mercer's lawyer called requesting a meeting. Daniel had served 18 months in federal prison. He'd lost everything: his career, his reputation, most of his money to legal fees and restitution. He'd been released 3 weeks ago. Ethan agreed to meet him at a coffee shop in neutral territory. Daniel looked different, smaller. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by something that looked like exhaustion and maybe regret. "I know you don't owe me anything," Daniel said after they'd sat down. "I tried to destroy you. I framed you for crimes you didn't commit. I cost you months of your life and nearly sent you to prison. Yes, you did. I wanted to apologize, not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserve to hear it." Daniel looked down at his coffee. "I spent 18 months in prison thinking about what I did, why I did it, and I realized I was angry at the wrong person." "You were angry at yourself," Ethan said quietly. "I was angry that you were right, about Hartwell, about my corner cutting, about all of it. And instead of accepting that I'd made mistakes, I decided you were the problem." Daniel looked up. "That was cowardice, and I'm sorry." Ethan studied him. The man who'd orchestrated his arrest, who'd planted evidence and paid for a media campaign to destroy his reputation. The man who'd cost him everything. "I don't forgive you," Ethan said. Daniel nodded. "I understand. But I appreciate the apology. It doesn't change what happened, but it matters that you acknowledge it." They sat in silence for a moment. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked. "I have no idea. No firm will hire me. My reputation is toxic. I have a felony record." Daniel laughed bitterly. "I'm exactly where you were after Cambridge, except you were innocent. You could do something else, something outside finance." "Like what?" "I've spent my entire life in this industry. It's all I know." Ethan thought about that, about how systems trapped people not just through punishment, but through limited imagination about what else was possible. "There's a non-profit that helps white-collar offenders reintegrate into society," Ethan said. "They offer job training, placement services, counseling. I can give you their contact information." Daniel looked surprised. "Why would you help me?" Because staying angry at you doesn't help anyone, and because everyone deserves a chance to rebuild. Ethan paused. You destroyed that chance for me once. I won't do the same to you. Daniel's eyes went wet. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just do better. After Daniel left, Ethan sat with his coffee and thought about justice and mercy and the difference between them. Justice was Daniel in prison paying for his crimes. Mercy was offering him information about a second chance. Both mattered. Both had their place. Victoria called him that evening. I heard about your meeting with Daniel, she said. News travels fast. Richard saw you two at the coffee shop. He was concerned. I'm fine. It was just coffee and an apology I didn't ask for. But appreciated? Ethan thought about that. Yeah, I guess I did appreciate it. Doesn't change what he did, but it helps to know he understands why it was wrong. You gave him the nonprofit's information. I did. That's very generous considering he tried to put you in prison. Generous would be hiring him. I just gave him information about resources that exist. Ethan paused. I've been where he is. Not the guilty part, but the blacklisted part. The unemployable part. The part where you can't imagine how to move forward. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Even someone who deserves it? Especially someone who deserves it, because that's when mercy matters most. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You're a better person than I am. I've just had more practice losing everything. They talked for a while longer about other things. Upcoming client meetings, the Truth Initiative's latest placements, Richard's terrible attempts at office humor. Normal things. Work things. When they hung up, Ethan realized something had shifted. The anger he'd carried for years, at Cambridge, at the system, at people like Daniel, had loosened its grip. Not disappeared, but become something he could carry without it consuming him. Maybe that was growth. Or maybe it was just exhaustion. Either way, it felt like progress. The final piece fell into place on a cold morning in November, 4 years after Ethan had first told Victoria not to sign the Silverton deal. A young woman walked into Hastings Capital's offices asking to speak with Ethan Ward. She was nervous, clutching a folder like it was a lifeline. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was a data analyst at a pharmaceutical company. She'd discovered that her employer was manipulating clinical trial results to hide dangerous side effects in a new medication. She'd reported it internally. They'd fired her and threatened legal action if she went public. I don't know what to do, Sarah said, sitting in Ethan's office. If I stay quiet, people get hurt. If I speak up, I lose everything. I have student loans. I have rent. I have a life that falls apart if I don't have income. Ethan looked at this young woman facing the same choice he'd faced twice. The same choice that had destroyed his career at Cambridge and nearly destroyed him at Hastings Capital. What do you want to do? Ethan asked. I want to expose them, but I'm terrified. You should be. What you're describing will cost you your job, probably your savings, possibly years of your life fighting legal battles. Ethan leaned forward. But if you're right, if they're hiding side effects that could hurt people, then staying quiet costs lives. So the question isn't whether you'll lose something. The question is what you can live with losing. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. How did you do it? At Cambridge? How did you survive? Barely. I lost my job, my reputation, my career. I spent years cleaning offices because no one would hire me. I got arrested for crimes I didn't commit. Ethan paused, but I also found people who believed in me, who gave me a second chance, who showed me that doing the right thing doesn't always mean doing it alone. What if no one believes me? Then you keep telling the truth until someone does, or you walk away and live with the knowledge that you tried. Ethan pulled out a business card. But if you decide to move forward, we'll help you. Documentation, legal support, whatever you need. You won't be alone in this. Sarah took the card. Why would you do that? Because someone did it for me, and because the system only changes when enough people refuse to play along. Sarah left with the card and a promise to think about it. 3 days later, she came back. She'd decided to blow the whistle. Hastings Capital helped her document everything, connected her with lawyers who specialized in whistleblower cases, and supported her through the SEC investigation that followed. The pharmaceutical company fought hard. They denied everything, attacked Sarah's credibility, threatened legal action, but the evidence was solid, and eventually the truth came out. The medication was pulled from the market. The company paid massive fines. 3 executives were charged with fraud. And Sarah Chen, blacklisted from pharma, joined Hastings Capital as a junior analyst. Ethan watched her walk into the office on her first day, nervous and hopeful and carrying the weight of someone who'd sacrificed everything for integrity. He remembered that feeling. Victoria appeared beside him. "That's number 23. "What?" "23rd person we've placed through the Truth Initiative. 23 people who lost everything for doing the right thing and found a second chance here." She smiled. "You're building something bigger than either of us imagined." "We're building it," Ethan corrected. "You're the one who took a chance on a janitor with an MIT degree and a chip on his shoulder." "Best decision I ever made." They stood there watching Sarah get oriented, watching Maya show her around, watching Richard crack jokes that made her laugh despite her nervousness. "Do you think we're actually changing things?" Ethan asked. "Or are we just finding the handful of people willing to fight and giving them a place to land?" "Both," Victoria said. "We're changing things for those people, and those people are changing things for others. That's how systems shift, not through grand gestures, but through accumulated decisions by people who refuse to compromise." Ethan thought about that, about all the small battles they'd fought, about Hartwell and Morrison and Vertex and Grayson and all the other companies they'd pushed toward better choices, about Maya and Sarah and the others who'd found refuge here, about the slow, frustrating, essential work of making integrity profitable. "It's not enough," Ethan said. "It never is, but it's something, and something is how you build toward everything." That evening, Ethan stayed late at the office, not because he had work to finish, but because he wanted to be there, wanted to look at the space they'd created, the team they'd built, the battles they'd won, the people they'd saved. The boardroom where it all started was dark now. He walked in and turned on the lights. The same glass table, the same windows overlooking Manhattan, the same room where a janitor had once told a room full of executives not to sign a deal. Ethan sat in the chair he'd occupied that day, looked at the seat Victoria had occupied, remembered how terrified he'd been, how certain that speaking up would cost him the invisibility that kept him safe. He'd been right about that. It had cost him his invisibility. But what he'd found in exchange was worth more than safety. He'd found purpose, partnership, a way to fight that didn't require destroying himself in the process. He'd found proof that systems could change, that integrity could survive, that doing the right thing didn't always mean doing it alone. Victoria was right. They hadn't fixed everything. The industry still rewarded lies too often and punished truth too harshly. Companies still cut corners and covered up fraud and prioritized profit over people. But they'd created an alternative, a place where honesty was valued, where whistleblowers weren't liabilities but assets, where the people the system discarded could find their way back. And that mattered. Ethan's phone buzzed, a message from Sarah Chen. "Thank you for believing me when no one else did. I won't let you down." He smiled and typed back, "You already haven't. Welcome to the team." He turned off the lights and headed home, leaving the boardroom dark and empty. But not for long. Tomorrow it would fill again with people trying to do difficult things the right way, with analysts who'd chosen integrity over convenience, with clients who wanted truth instead of validation, with proof that another way was possible. The janitor who'd stopped a billion-dollar deal was gone. In his place was a partner who'd helped rebuild the rules, who'd shown that power didn't always corrupt, that systems could learn, that truth could survive if enough people fought for it. It wasn't a perfect ending. The world was still broken in 1,000 ways, but it was better than it had been. And tomorrow, they'd make it a little better still. That was enough. That was everything.